Bonjour.
Howdy, howdy. Can you hear us okay?
Hello, Ľudovít. My name is Marian. Can you hear me? Clear and sound?
I can, Marianne. How are you?
Okay, how are you? We're fine. It's a little bit colder here, probably.
It is 9:30 at night, and I think it's about 35 degrees.
Allowing us to do that, we very much appreciate you. I have to say a few words at the beginning. So we are at the Film and Television Faculty of Film Academy Slovakia, Bratislava. We have our dear guest, Ben Richards, and who is hosting this webinar.
Without further ado, I guess I should probably lead with a little bit of preamble about kind of how I approach the problem, if we think of it as a design. And if I say anything that somebody doesn't understand, just interrupt me and I'll explain. The problem of clearly conveying a story to an audience using the tools that we have at our disposal. In this case, it's actors, or characters of some description, or I suppose, because you can have performers and characters in the case of virtual production pipelines, story blocks, design, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like narrative devices, for example, Chekhov's gun, or in the case of the Avengers, nanobots to explain how Tony Stark's suit can suddenly do everything ever and change the course of human history because it's based on some sort of magical technology, never mind all the stupid stuff that's going on with the space rocks. But the point still remains the same, is that, there's narrative devices and all of these different tools we have at our disposal to combine in interesting and new ways in order to create compelling stories for an audience. The question that I found myself coming up against during my research, my PhD research, is how do I know I'm doing a good job? How do I know that I'm combining these things in a way that is actually interesting to a bunch of different people and not just interesting to me, or not just cool because I think it's cool? Because, secretly, that's the thing that every creator believes, is because I like it, somebody else out there in the world must like it. But how do we know? How can we be confident that that is actually the case? And that led me down a rabbit hole in terms of my thought process and my practice, my creative practice. And that rabbit hole has led me to believe that there's about 6 things that make things good. And as you can see on the first slide there, that's the goal here. Make it good, make it interesting, make it compelling, make an audience actually want to pay attention to what it is you're talking about. So first, what does that even mean? What is good? How do we know what good is? How do we know what's better, or the best thing, or boring? How do we know it's actually boring for most people and not just boring for us? And what are the qualities that we're looking for, the attributes, the levers that we can pull on in order to make something interesting?
Okay. I'm hooked up. I'm interested already. Okay.
So, and by the time we get to the end of this, perhaps if there's anybody in the room who's interested in programming and artificial intelligence, this is probably an interesting place to start to make a story generator. Anyway, storytelling, we're pretty good at it. There's plenty of theories that help us analyze drama. There's elements of drama, which is something that's taught a lot in Australia, particularly in Queensland, since the elements of drama were actually developed in Brisbane, in Queensland. And then there's older ways of looking at drama. And the reason I bring up drama is because that's kind of my background. I started out in theatre. I wanted to become a filmmaker, so I got into filmmaking. I produced a bunch of feature films. I got to direct a feature film. I made a video game, and now I'm starting to look at VR, and it occurs to me that VR and video games and, theater and film and music and visual arts and all of these different things have certain elements across all of them that are actually really interesting to us. And so I went back to look at capital D drama as a field of study to see if there's anything in there that can help me explain what it is that I found about all of those different things interesting. What are the common levers across multiple artistic fields? And what became plainly apparent is that these things here sometimes are useful, sometimes aren't useful, and they just kind of pointed me in a direction but didn't really give me any help. So it became apparent that I needed to make a new one. So that's where we started to go.
Let's
How do we
reinvent Aristotle, right? Let's start again. Yeah, go on.
So the goals of the research was to make interesting choices. And the reason that I wanted to frame it that way was because back when I was in uni, that's my first ever acting teacher. That's Margie Brownash. And we were doing this scene, and we had, as actors, we're kind of faced with this. I say we, but I haven't acted in like almost 15 years, so what do I know? But I've been teaching actors for about the same amount of time. Anyway, as actors, the goal is to, you make choices all the time about how you're going to deliver a line, what's interesting about the line, do I pitch it high, do I pitch it low, do I speed up, do I slow down, where do I pause, do I not pause at all, do I make it all the same thought, same sentence, run it all together, do I talk like Christopher Walken, or do I talk like Nicolas Cage, or do I talk like Kate Blanchett, like what flavor, what texture, what tone, what timbre, what musicality am I bringing to the line? That's on the technical level. And on the other level, it's what is the meaning of the line? How am I conveying it? Okay. And am I getting the right meaning? So Margie told me in our first one, she said, look, whenever you're faced with one of these choices, don't just make the choice that makes the most sense. Your job is not to make sense only. Your job is to be interesting. Your job is to tell a story. So she said, make interesting choices and frame it that way. And you'll notice if there's anybody who's looked at design thinking in the room, that design thinking practice or methods actually focus a lot on divergent thinking and how do we make choices that are outside of what we are expecting. And because of that, it started to lead me down a little bit of a path where I started thinking about, right, well, how do we know what's interesting? And this is, again, coming back to the core of the whole problem. How do we know? How do we know what's interesting? What am I pulling on? What am I tuning into that's making it interesting? And so I wanted to detach creativity from mysticism. I wanted to stop people thinking about, oh, you're just talented, or you're such a good storyteller, and making it seem like, oh, you're either born with it or you're shit at it, go home and become an accountant. Like, we needed to pull those two things apart, because being good at storytelling or being a good actor or being a good musician is not a product of genes, it is a product of practice. Okay. It is something that you can learn over a period of time and get better at, just like any other craft. If you can get good at carpentry by being a carpenter, then you can get good at acting by being an actor, and you can get good at storytelling by being a storyteller.
So you're training your creative muscle, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. If you don't work it out, you lose it. You don't know how to do it anymore. It becomes harder to think divergently. And, in one of those famous sort of divergent thinking experiments, it's quite old now, I can't remember who the guy was who brought it about. He said, you can ask a dozen people, name as many things as you can that would be uses for a paperclip. And, you get all the normal ones like, oh, I could use it as a lockpick, or I could turn it into a little shape of something, a tree shape thing. I could use it to reset my iPhone. I could use, and you come up with all those normal ones. And it takes a truly divergent thinker to think in terms of, well, what if the paperclip was 40 meters high and made out of rubber? I mean, it's not a very good paperclip, but what can I use that for? It's just in the shape of a paperclip. What if the paperclip was made out of nanobots? What if it was a paperclip in my mind? So I wanted to think about it.
We have been there. Okay. Yeah.
So I wanted to think about it in terms of what is actually actionable about this, as opposed to analytical as well. Give people tools to do things with, to analyze things with, in a way that gives them actions that they can take to improve it, as opposed to, oh, we can tell, we don't want a topography, we want a manual, if that makes sense. We don't just want to categorize, this is dramatic meaning, and you create dramatic meaning by having mood and characters. How do we know it's a good mood? How do we know it's an effective mood? How do we know they're good and interesting characters? So we need tools to be able to do those things well.
Okay.
I came up with these 6 things. And I've been practicing these 6 things and kind of meditating on it, I guess, for the last 13 years, I think, kind of accidentally, through all sorts of different things, mostly training actors, but also a little bit of teaching, writing, actually having practice as a screenwriter, through producing, leading groups of people, design thinking challenges, making a video game, all of those different things, kind of looking across them, I was like, actually, I think these things are kind of them. It's a long story on how I came to these 6 and not 7, because there used to be 7 and so on and so forth, but this is where I'm at the moment. So the first one, dynamic. And I should say that all of these are basically predicated on the idea that if you can figure out how your work, your creative output is these 6 things, or is how it scales on one of these 6 attributes, then you can figure out how to make it more of that attribute and therefore more interesting, theoretically. So the first one is dynamic. And what do I say by dynamic? Well, basically, dynamic is like dynamite, things that explode, things that change state. And that's effectively the thing that I think underpins most really compelling storytelling, is things that change get the audience's attention. So, this is actually an interesting conversation I had with an evolutionary biologist. If you can see the lion in that picture, you will survive. Can anyone see it?
Yep.
Where is it?
Near the tree on the left side on the horizon.
Up the top?
Yeah.
Awesome. You survive. Everybody else in the room is dead.
Including me, yeah.
What about this one?
Yep.
Yeah, pretty obvious. Good. Okay, so the point that I wanted to illustrate with that, however hand-fistedly that it is that human beings are really, really, really good pattern recognition machines. We are better at recognizing patterns and picking breaks in patterns than just about any other species that I know of. And that's been hardwired into us by millions upon millions of years of evolution. But basically, if we spot a break in a pattern, it normally means there's a predator there. Therefore, whenever we spot a break in a pattern, we get a little kick of adrenaline. And the little kick of endorphins, reward kind of circuits kick in, and we have a biological, hardwired system that tells us if we spot a break in a pattern, we get rewards. Just like eating a chocolate bar, we get a little reward kick from it.
I can relate to that.
Right. And because human beings, we've got this fascinatingly wired brain, we actually start using different parts of it in really interesting ways. And Ben was actually there for this part of this missing piece of this conversation, in that conversation with Ted Goranson, where he started talking about how he's a machine learning expert and artificial intelligence expert. And he was talking about how human beings actually use a part of our brain that was generally used for spatial recognition and map making in order to find our way through stories. That part of our brain, that machinery, is used to navigate stories and also to predict stories. And so this led me to think that human beings find changes in storytelling so interesting because we are utterly compelled to on a biological level. So that made me then think that good storytellers, the best storytellers, what they are actually doing to keep people interested is establishing patterns so that the audience can predict the next step, and then deliberately disrupting the pattern right around the time that the audience feels comfortable with where they think the story is going to go next.
Okay.
And I want to just drill down on that one, because that matters on both the smallest scale and on the biggest scales. It happens from line to line, from word to word within an actor's speech and their syntax, the way that they say what they say. It happens within a scene. We normally talk about it with actors about having a turning point in the scene, or like a critical moment where the beginning of the scene sets some stuff up, and then there's a key piece of information or a key dynamic shift in the politics of the scene, in the status quo, that forces the characters to reevaluate what's going to happen next. And that's the turning point of the scene. And most scenes will have at least one. Some longer scenes will have 2, 3, 4, etc. These big turning points.
Okay.
And they're all just fancy ways of saying big change. There's a change from line to line to keep people interested. And if you look at the speech pattern of somebody like Christopher Walken, it's embedded in the way that he breaks up his sentences in really peculiar places where you're not expecting them to be broken. And because of that constant change in pattern, it forces you to really listen and also find some joy in it, because again, those endorphins are pumping when you keep spotting these breaks and patterns. And then it happens in the scene, it happens throughout the act. There are multiple beats in acts, story beats. It happens from act to act, from act 1 to act 2 to act 3. It happens between films in a trilogy. And then we get examples like this, which is every single Avengers movie ever, plus all of the other Marvel Cinematic Universe things. And you'll spot that there's a pattern with all of these, which is that at the end of every single one of these movies, bar none, the heroes win.
Yeah, and we know that since the beginning, but we don't know how they win. So that's the thrill,
right? But they win. And this is kind of to demonstrate how pattern breaking on a really large scale is also delightful for audiences, because then you get this dude who rocks up and snaps his fingers, and everyone's like, well, shit, I don't know what happens next. Did they just kill half of them? Spoiler alert, but it's been 2 years. I'm sure you'll catch up.
We are already informed about this. Okay, so go on. No worries.
Right?
Say.
So, and that's kind of how pattern breaking works on a really big scale as well. And then we end up re-establishing a new pattern in the next film. And that is that, and now we can comfortably predict that the next set of Avengers movies and Marvel Cinematic Universe movies will probably follow a similar pattern to this. They will have heroes winning, heroes winning, heroes winning, heroes winning. Big bad shows up, heroes losing. It's probably going to come earlier this time because, honestly, it's going to keep audiences more interested. Until eventually it's going to end up inverting, and every single Marvel Cinematic movie in the year 2050 will have the heroes losing. And it'll be the one where they win at the end that will break the pattern again. So on and so forth. Is that making sense to everybody?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I really like to hammer in on that with particularly young actors, young directors, young screenwriters. Really think about what you're changing from moment to moment, scene to scene, so on and so forth. Think about what the change is and how to make that as how do I say this? How to make those changes both justified and different enough that they are surprising. And that's where the craft is. You just got to sit right in that special spot between it makes sense, but it's not predictable.
And it's not too wide. I mean that space is not very wide, because you can either be like detached, you fantasize too much, nobody's interested, or you are predictable. So we know this position. But how you deal with that? How you know that you are on the spot? How do you know is that you are connecting a lot around you, and you know everything like Tarantino. That means you know all the movies, all the people. That's basically the sweet spot.
Yeah. Tarantino is somebody who does it really, really well, where he starts a scene and you think it's going one way, and then they take a dead body out of the trunk of a car, or they start a scene and it's going really well, and then somebody gets shot in the face and ruins their day.
Basically, yeah.
Like it's you start off thinking it's one thing, and you start as an audience member, you predict the end of the scene based on all the information that you've given them. And so I think that's probably where I would suggest to put a lot of focus is actually on the setting up of the pattern.
Okay.
Does that make sense? To make sure that you're setting down those key beats for the audience so that they think you got to lull them into a false sense of confidence.
It makes big sense because you need to set up, it's like in music, you need to set up some pattern, and basically the drama is when everyone expects something and you suddenly shift a little bit. Not too much, and no one is predicting how. That's what we're talking about, if I'm right. Is that
right, exactly. And then the story continues. And to take the music as an analogy, it's like the difference between an imperfect cadence and a perfect cadence.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same sort of a thing. That imperfect cadence feels unfinished, but it doesn't feel so unfinished that it's just dissonant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great point.
Okay, so the next one is specific, because this is another thing that I find creatives don't do enough of. And that is be really precise with what they're talking about. And it's not just me who says it. Shakespeare said, brevity is the soul of wit. And I bring up brevity, or what's another way of saying that? Conciseness. Being as concise as possible or using as few words as possible is pretty much the goal for just about any creative. And that's not necessarily just constrained to things like words. It's also things like story beats or scenes or characters or whatever it is. It became apparent to me through particularly my writing craft that the process of making something like a screenplay is actually a process of cutting away all the things that don't need to be there, because it's easy to write and fill out character dialogues and pages with just heaps and heaps and heaps of information. All of the exposition and world building and relationship building that you can possibly squeeze in there. And if you just go to town on it, you end up with far more material than you actually need to tell the story. You end up with so much material that the story can get a bit boring, can become labored. It can start to buckle under its own weight. And so it became very clear to me that the process of making something good is also the process of cutting away all of the things that are not absolutely necessary to what you are trying to do with that thing. And that's why I talk about being specific. Einstein also said something along these lines. If you can't explain something simply, then you don't understand it well enough. And that's why I would also challenge creatives or creators in any capacity to explain it in the most simplest terms possible. And if you can explain it in the simplest terms possible, then your audience will most likely understand it, because you have a very, very solid grasp on exactly what you're trying to do. And this is where you've got to spend all your time as well when you're doing your homework, is to really figure out what you're trying to say with as fewer words as possible. A really quick example is that I find with young screenwriters is that they tend to use phrases like, George ran quickly to the car. What do you mean he ran quickly? Why didn't he sprint?
Okay.
Did he sprint? Did he jog? Did he lope? Do you know what I mean? There's so many words around to describe that action that give it a sense of meaning, that give it some purpose, some flavor, that color the action itself, and a more dense description of the action without using simple terms. like ran quickly. Oh my God, that's so boring. Ran quickly. So actively being specific counteracts the confusion that's inherent in the act of interpretation in the audience. That's a really academic framing of it, which is basically on one side, if you hold your hands out, your left hand is you, your right hand is the audience. If you were holding a ball and you threw it from one hand to the other, that's pretty much what you're doing, and the ball is the meaning. If you are being very specific with what you're trying to say, you are far more likely to actually hit the target as opposed to miss the target and the audience missing the meaning. It's kind of like aiming for the bullseye rather than just aiming for the dartboard. Is that making sense?
Does it make sense? And I would say that making something really simple is the most difficult and like difficult thing. It's like it's easy to make something complicated. We know that very well as well because we have animators here and we animators are striving to make something simple, clean, and as you say, just with minimal means to say what you mean precisely. Like don't overdo it, don't over talk too much as I'm talking now. Okay.
Well, yeah, but it needs exactly as much as it needs, no more. You know,
Great point.
And it's a hard thing to figure out. And honestly, a lot of this process is very difficult to do all by yourself. It's much more useful if you've got an extra pair of eyes to look over what you're doing, some sounding board and audience to test if what you're saying, if what you're trying to tell, the story you're telling, is making sense. Yes. You know, if it's too complex, cool. If they get it too easily or you can see them getting bored, you've got too much information in there. Start cutting it away. You've got to stay ahead of the audience's understanding. And that goes back to the pattern making. You'll start to see that all of these relate to each other in a really interwoven way. So revelatory or revealing is the next one. Who's heard of Chekhov's gun? Anybody?
No. Chekhov's guns, like Three Sisters and gun on the wall.
Bingo. Yeah.
Okay, classic, but.
When
there's a gun on the wall, just use it.
Yeah, if you have a gun on the mantelpiece in the first act, then by the third act, it has to have gone off. And this kind of goes back to the specificity thing as well, the specific thing. If the gun's not going to go off, don't put it there. It's not necessary. It's not important to the story, theoretically. And that's a very ham-fisted way of doing it. Obviously, real storytelling has a lot more nuance in it than this does. There's a lot more detail. Perhaps the gun is metaphorical, etc. But without belaboring the metaphor, that's kind of the principle of the thing. If you mention something, it's got to be useful or functional to the story. Otherwise, it doesn't need to be there.
There was one interesting thing Ben mentioned yesterday regarding the movie Insane Manners. And that was that the more complicated or beautiful version was actually working less. It was much stronger. Is that correct?
Yeah, much stronger for the message to be a simpler illustration style.
So
right, yeah.
I think that's a good example that you really, sometimes you are just stopping the thing by adding more layers of complexity, and you really need to leave out a lot to make it work. Kind of light.
Actually, there's a good another postmodern demonstration of this. If you look at the opening sequence for a new show on Apple Television called The Morning Show. Has anybody seen any of that?
Not sure. No. Morning Show, no.
Yeah, maybe later if we get time in this session, I'll pull that up. But the opening sequence in that is a postmodern indication of how simple can create a lot of meaning with very little effort. Okay, so revelatory. This is also pertaining to like every single moment, every single thing that you do. And you guys probably will have all experienced this as storytellers, as audience members. Is that whenever you go to a movie or you're watching a movie or you're playing a game or you're looking at some artwork, you are absorbing every single piece of information that you can possibly find in that particular experience, whatever it may be, music, art, game, etc. If an actor looks down a little bit and then to the left, or if they twitch their nose, or they rub their nose, or they adjust their pants or their shirt, or all of that information, audiences are hungry for it, every single aspect of it. And this starts to tie together with specificity as well. Being specific is that there's a bunch of filmmakers in the room over there, isn't there?
We are all filmmakers, basically, yeah.
All filmmakers?
Yeah.
Right. So this is something that I talk to actors about all the time, is like they need to have, and this is where their training should really focus, really excellent control of their bodies.
Okay.
Something like 70 to 80% of human communication is wrapped up in body language. More than what you say and more than how you say it is body language. And with that in mind, and knowing that audiences are hunting for this information all of the time, they are sucking it in like sponges, it's really, really critically important that actors have excellent control over what they are doing with their hands, what they're doing with their positioning, how much tension they are holding in their shoulders, how much tension they're holding in their core, how deep their breaths are, how relaxed they seem, how tense they seem, how tall they seem, how proud they seem, how sad they seem, whatever, not sad, how depressed or deflated they seem. All of those sort of physical attributes tell the audience a lot more about the character than what they're saying or how they're saying it.
All right.
So I would really, 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 and the animators in the room will absolutely know this, is that really concentrate on making sure that your actors are not relying on the text to do all the heavy lifting for them. It's actually their bodies that's doing the heavy lifting, and they can't forget that. So I would also suggest to any filmmakers in the room, go and have a look at theatrical training techniques from places like the City Group in New York. That's spelled SITI, and the practitioner is Anne Bogart. They do a bunch of physical theatre over there, and another really excellent practitioner is Stephen Burkhoff in London. I think he's dead now, but again, really excellent actors training that concentrates on getting them to use their bodies to communicate meaning more than they use their voices, more than they use the actual text itself.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, be hungry for those things. Don't limit yourself to just looking at how film actors act. Go looking for more training techniques, more activities, more drama games that you can play with your actors in order to bring that material out of them. It's critical for conveying meaning. So yeah, and then as writers in the room, as directors in the room, you have to also go digging into the story for every single little piece of meaning that might be construed in every single punctuation mark in the story as well. And if anybody's ever written something, you'll know what it's like to do multiple drafts, and oftentimes you'll be agonizing over where do I put a comma in this position or a full stop and then start a new sentence? Do I put a dash? Like you try to figure out exactly the right punctuation to communicate the pace and the timing and the texture of the line. And then to have that happen and then have an actor disregard that without fully understanding what the meaning is terribly frustrating. And also directors have the danger of misinterpreting something by not spending the time to really understand what the sorry, excuse me, there's a thunderstorm starting outside.
Oh, well, sounds good. Sounds really like strong one. Hope you are safe, okay?
Yeah, if I go black, if the screen goes dark, that's what's happened. My power's been cut.
Oh no.
So
yeah,
I would say go digging for all of that, and the reason you have to go digging for all of that meaning in there is because the audience is hungry for every little bit of meaning that you are conveying to them. So it's very, very important to understand as much of it as you can possibly get your hands on, from the smallest pieces to the largest dramatic questions that encompass the entire work. The next one, focused. You can see that I love that cat meme. It cracks me up. So there's two things when I talk about. Actually, how are we going for time, Ben?
We're 45 minutes in.
Okay, so we'll wrap this up quickly. There's two things that I'm talking about when it comes to focus. There's little f focus and big F focus. Little f focus is the focus of the audience. And that is all about, like, where are they looking? What are they looking at? What information are they meant to find there? So it's really about that pattern stuff again with the dynamics. How do I direct their focus? Now, filmmakers get an easy job of this, right? Because you can just point a camera at the gun in the person's back pocket, or you can point a camera at the phone screen, or you can point a camera in a close-up on the person's face and on the actor's face or the character's face and get a lot of detailed information from that. You can direct the audience's focus really, really, really easily by just moving the camera and picking it up. When it comes to things like VR, then your solutions... Oh, was that a question?
No, we are just inviting people. Go on, keep going. No. Okay, let's make 1 minute pause. Put this pause. So okay.
Sorry, I missed that. Say again.
So these are producers who arrived just right now, so we can also include them in your consideration. And you were explaining basic things, how to make a story or your product interesting, which is important because those producers are basically creative producers. So they are.
Oh yeah.
They are meant
this
to
is my stock and trade. I'm that's the day job, is producing.
I will try just quickly recap that there were like first point was. First part is, or second part is establish structure. That means make some expectation and then do something a little bit different than everyone expects. The first point was, please help me.
I might actually, when I get to the end, I'll quickly review each of the things.
Good. So let's jump in and continue. Sorry for that. Sorry for interruption. We are here.
No, all good. Okay, so yeah, it's about. So the little f focus it's just literally, it's the simple thing of getting the audience to look at or listen to what you want them to look at or listen to, and not get distracted by other things in the scene. Filmmakers have an easier time of this. Once you get into virtual reality or theater or video games, it becomes more difficult, and you have to use different devices in order to lead the audience's attention around, just like the laser pointer with the cat. Or if you've watched The Matrix, the girl in the red dress.
Yeah.
Think about it in those sort of terms, like how do I get the audience to look where I need them to look? And then you can take the analogy of something like the girl in the red dress to be a demonstration of how dynamics can actually get you to pull your audience's attention around. Showing a nice big grey scene with a bunch of people in black suits and then a girl in a red dress pops out is it's so jarringly different to everything else in the scene. You can't help but look at the lion in the grass, so to speak. And so it grabs the audience's attention immediately, and playing with the scale at which you want them to pay attention to something is where kind of hitting the sweet spot is. The big F focus of the work, as opposed to the focus of the audience, the focus of the work is all about the thematic meaning of the work. What are we trying to say about life, the universe, and everything with this particular piece of art? You might be trying to say nothing at all. You might be saying something absurdist, but even that is something, so to speak. Saying nothing is a statement all by itself, as any visual artist will tell you. Or John Cage, for the musicians in the room.
Yeah, that's a classic example with that 1 hour playing nothing and
Yeah, what is it? 4 minutes and 33 seconds or something is the name of the track, and it's just silence. And he records the audience's noises of that time period, and that's the performance. The audience is the performance. And even then, that is the dramatic meaning of the work. And so it's really important to identify that. Figure out what the central dramatic question is that you're asking your audience. You know, is the central dramatic question, what do I do with power once I have it? Does power corrupt? You know, does ultimate power corrupt ultimately? How does that, you know, what are you really asking? And then really nailing that down is going to help you focus the rest of the work around it. It's going to help you focus the information that you're giving people. It's going to help you make decisions about what to cut. It's going to help you make decisions about how to establish and break patterns to really demonstrate the theme of the work. But if you don't know it, you won't know how to focus those things. Reactive. I think this is the last one. So reactive is basically appreciating that every single story is this big, long chain reaction from the very start to the very beginning, from the thing that happens before the first scene or the first moment, or even if it's a video game, the music that is playing while the thing is installing. That is part of the narrative experience for the player or for the user or for the cinema goer. You know, the opening title sequence is just as much a part of the story as anything else. And it goes all the way through until the moment after the last frame. Or in the case of the Marvel Cinematic movies, the moment after half of the fucking credits. So all of that is terribly important. And when it comes to your actors, it's important to help them figure out, like, who's ever had an actor come up to them and say, what's my motivation for saying this line? Or why am I saying this? Or what does this mean? Or anything to that effect. What the actor's really struggling with generally is, how does this thing fit into this big long chain of things that is the story? How does this thing fit into the pattern? And thinking about it in terms of reactivity helps to interweave those patterns in a really connected way. Something happens, and then something happens as a reaction to it, which causes something else to happen, which causes something else to happen, and so on and so forth. Anybody who's ever, I mean, Trey Parker and Matt Stone frame it really interesting. Those are the creators of South Park. And they basically say that every single story happens in this order. What is it? First something, then something happens, but something happens, then something happens, but something happens, then something happens, the end. Okay. And it kind of ends up becoming the sequence of this, basically, this happens, then, but, then, the end. Yeah. To that effect. And that's pretty much a 7-beat story structure. If you've ever seen, you know, one of those filmmaking books about, these are the 7 beats of your story, and it has to be this, or Joseph Campbell and all the rest of it. Yeah, forget all of that and just think about it in terms of everything that happens needs to be a reaction to something else that's happening. That way it stays very logically sound. If you can't figure out what it's a reaction to, chances are it's breaking a pattern in a way that doesn't make sense. It's chaotic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that.
Yeah. So it happens on really small scales from line to line for actors. It happens on bigger scales when it starts to talk about the beginning of the scene, and then there's a turning point, and then the last part of the scene is normally a reaction to the key piece of information that was revealed in the turning point. It happens with body language. I get punched in the face, my head cocks sideways. That's a reaction. And how things react tells an audience all about how the characters are created. So you got to think about what is the chemistry that comes about when you've got character A and B in a room. What are the politics and how does that react? Character A with circumstances A. You know, this is Tony Stark defusing a bomb. This is the Queen of England defusing a bomb. you know, like what happens when you mix these things up in interesting ways? What happens if it's the Queen of England defusing the bomb on a spaceship? What happens if it's the Queen of England defusing a bomb in Buckingham Palace? So the context also matters. Too much reactivity ends up making the story chaotic, and it becomes, it starts to lose meaning, and too little reactivity makes it boring. It's no longer dynamic enough because things aren't electric, so to speak. And the last one is holistic, which is basically, that's you. Is that Space Cowboy? It is too, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Totally found him. That's you. The axe is specificity. The chainsaw, that's going to be reactivity. The other axe, that's dynamics. This, the thing, you know, the unicycle that he's on, that's revelatory, or the information that you're trying to sell, and that's basically your job. You've got to manage all of these other 5 things in equal balance, because if you do too much of one, it's normally to the detriment of one of the others. Or basically you sacrifice some for the sake of others. So if you can keep them balanced and consider how they work together, it ends up being a lot more, it ends up becoming a lot more resolved as an artwork, if that makes sense. And
Makes sense, and
yeah,
it's good metaphor. I'm getting it. Yeah.
So to sum up, basically the 6 levers that we have to pull on to keep an audience interested in something, the 6 creative practice attributes that we need to consider is dynamics, specifics, revelatory or revealing information, focus, and reactivity, and holisticness. Dynamic, specific, revelatory, focused, reactive, and holistic. And to review quickly, dynamics talks about establishing patterns and then breaking patterns deliberately in order to make an audience pay attention. That happens on small scale and large scale, like the lines in the grass, Thanos, and that's patterns. Specificity talks about how to be precise and be prepared for what you're talking about. Don't use 2 words when 1 word will do the job. Revealing information is all about figuring out exactly what you're trying to say and how to make sure that the specifics of the scene and the dynamics of the scene or the moment or the line or the whole film really pull that information out and make it clear to the audience that that is what you're saying. Even if you're saying nothing, focus is 2 things, little focus or little f focus, which is where is the audience looking, why are they looking there, and what are they meant to find there? And big F focus is, what am I really trying to say about life, the universe, and everything? And how is that demonstrated in every little tiny piece of this thing, as well as the bigger pieces? The beats, the lines, the scenes, the acts, the story writ large. The reactivity talks about how everything that happens in the story, from the first frame to the moment after the last frame, is a reaction to something else that is going on. And holistic means you've got to consider all of these things together in concert. Otherwise, you'll end up revealing all of this information and your whole story will be a block of exposition and it will bore the shit out of your audience, so to speak. That's just one example.
Yeah.
The end.
Great.
Awesome.
Questions? I have one, but I want to. Yeah.
I'm going to bring it back here. Yeah, so does anyone have any questions?
Well, I had one, okay? Maybe someone else is coming with theirs. So we know that you are documentaries, you are into VR, virtual reality, is that correct?
Yep.
You have credits, that means you are producer, director, and of course, awesome teacher, as I see now. Anyway, I would like to ask those 6 principles of how to make things interesting, which I understand was your thesis, right? Are they working the same way in virtual reality as a medium where you entertain yourself? Is it the same, or is that something specific?
That was actually the starting point. Was because I started, the PhD started out as me trying to define what the languages and conventions of of virtual reality are. You know, like for the filmmakers in the room, things like the Kuleshov effect works for film, which talks about editing. But in VR, you can't edit. So what's really happening with the Kuleshov effect? How does that work, etc. So it really became about this hypothesis that VR was an intersection of film, theater, and video games.
Yes.
And it kind of is, but it doesn't quite use any of the analytical frameworks from those three things straight away. And so that's where this work started coming into play, where I was like, okay, well, what's the commonality between these frameworks? And then that mashed up against my personal creative practice, I was like, actually, I think these are the 6 things. So the hypothesis is these are the 6 things that makes shit interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes story in any medium interesting.
Yeah, and sometimes it may not, I mean, I'm starting to experiment with the idea that some of these things may not be unique to story. They may be also applicable to things like, I don't know, design, architecture. They may be applicable to visual art. They may be applicable to graphic design. They may be applicable to music.
Well, there are. I may tell there was a workshop of a director Sorrentino's architect. I mean, Sorrentino with all his beautiful Cannes movies, and his architect, a woman, was here having a master class. And the main idea was you have to delete. That's basically precisely your point, that your creative work is to create void, to make something less like. And what you decide to take out is basically your act of creation. And
Yeah.
that was like awesome to watch how much they delete. So they make a huge research. They visit, for instance, Morocco and do a lot of pictures, and at the end they end with something which is like 2 lines, 1 line, second line, and an empty space. But they need all that to just sort of boil it off and find that precise 3 lines, and they work. And that was all. But it was so much work, and at the same time the result was so strong, because you can watch Sorrentino's movies, and we were asking a question like, how do you work with this director? How do you make your, I don't know, big meetings, or how do you create things? And she said like, meeting with Sorrentino is like, I asked him, how should I do it? And he takes just pen and says like, do it like this, okay? And that's all. The rest is my work, and that was really awesome to watch. And that's basically what you are saying and your experience. And I really like that metaphor about with the guy on the bicycle with chainsaw and everything, because it's so easy. It's so easy when you start doing anything. Anyone sitting here, I believe animators, VFX guys, producers, at some point will also realize that the first thing is that you will cut off your hand, because you are too much, I don't know, you are too much focused on your focus, and you are not thinking about audience focus. Or
Yes.
you are adding too much things, like, okay, we have some problem, how we solve it? Okay, let's add 1 more element, let's add more I know that because I did movie, and I started with 15 characters and end up with 5, and I probably would do better with 3. So that's like that's what we know about, and that's like huge things to hear from you, especially from you, with your experience, your point of view, and well, great.
Yeah,
Thanks very much.
I mean, like, and not just that experience is common to a lot of different fields. Bruce Lee talks about it in his book, The Art of Jeet Kune Do. He talks about how the becoming good at that particular martial art form is really embedded in cutting away all of the dead movement, the wasteful energy.
Okay.
And there's a great quote from a book that I am deeply in love with, as Ben would know, called Dune by Frank Herbert. And You know, the one with the sandworms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in that book, Herbert says that the Fremen, who are the native people on the planet, practice the way of the knife, which is about cutting things off, and then saying now it's complete because it doesn't have that on it anymore. It doesn't have that dragging it down, that anchor. And yeah, I mean, it's common throughout a lot of things, that idea that it's easy to stick more on. It's hard to get rid of stuff that's not necessary. And for producers, this is doubly important, particularly as we start to segue into the marketing conversation and the distribution conversation, is that you'll find a lot of the work of a producer is actually in distilling an idea that is complex, a 90, 200-page screenplay, however big it is, down to a paragraph, down to a 1-minute pitch for an elevator.
Yep.
And I mean, how do you do that if you don't know what it's really trying to say? What are the key elements of that story? And if you cut away all the nonsense, what's left? What's the most important parts that are critical for the telling of that particular story? So yeah, producers need to practice this as well, because you're storytellers too. If you're not a good storyteller, you're going to have a very difficult time getting a distributor.
All right. Any questions from the room? On the what I think is, may I call it like a checklist when you are, for instance, starting to develop a project, which I believe everyone here is about to do at some point. We have to develop our own projects, like every single person. We are not working on common things. And I believe your 6 points is like great checklist to check yourself, like, am I doing this? Am I doing this? Oh, I forgot about this, and that's probably a problem I have to look before I start to combining like professions, asking for other infos, asking for funding. Usually, you need some money to finish something, and that's like great navigation handbook. Okay, that's. I
also tend to use those 6 points when I'm trying to figure out, like, you know, I've written a screenplay, so I take it out and I get, you know, my girlfriend to read it, or I get Ben to read it, or I get somebody to read it and give me some feedback on it. Okay. And then sometimes it takes a little bit of doing to actually get a useful feedback. Otherwise, it's just, you know, oh, I didn't like it. Why? How? Yeah. What didn't you like? Exactly where? And sometimes I use, you know, using this is a good way to identify exactly what you're not quite getting, what you're not communicating effectively. And so I go hunting through this. I'm like, okay, I wasn't specific enough in this line. That's why they didn't get that meaning. Or they got bored in this part. So that means I need to put a change in that part there to keep them interested. They didn't understand this bit, so I didn't get the revealing information. Or this part here, it was too much chaos. It was unfocused. This part made no sense. It was not reactive enough to the other parts of the story. Okay, so it's also a great navigation list for asking a proper feedback, because we know everyone that your friends will tell you, okay, it's awesome, Dominic, do it, it will be great. Yeah, right. And the other, of course, anonymous discussion on the internet will be like, what a garbage, and you know, it's like, but no one is really giving you like constructive and valuable feedback. Okay, any questions, or can we go to the next topic? Probably, because we are a little bit with time. Also, your time is night, basically, so we are in advantage. Thank you very much. We will use this, and we will probably at some point come back how we are doing here in Slovakia with all that information. And I would like maybe to start the next part, the second, if it's okay with you. Yeah. And,
of course. Do you need a break or anything, Dom?
Nah.
Red Bull?
Nah. I had a coffee. I'm good.
Okay. So welcome everyone, and we have Dominic Christie, filmmaker, producer, director, and enthusiast. We are enthusiasts from Australia, who is giving us advice on the second topic, and it is
Yeah. So it's distribution and finding market interest for your projects, figuring out how to finance them, all of that stuff. Yeah, I mean it's a big cat to skin.
Okay.
So I can see some people have kind of perked up in the room now that we're talking about money. So I guess we'll dig straight in. So just so I can get a bit of a gauge here, is everybody here a student?
Well, student, hands up. I'm student. I teach, but I'm the doctor.
Yeah. Great.
Basically all of us.
Who's had any experience with financing a feature film or a television project or a small project, any project? Going out, getting money.
Not enough hands, but okay.
Yeah.
Four or five hands in the room.
Yeah, great. Good. Who has, of those 5 people, who got money from the government? Cool. Who got money from a private source, like a private investor of some description? Who got money from a distributor or a market entity of some description? What other sources of money are there? Who went and got 10 credit cards?
Your own money, obviously. Then you have something like friends' free work, because if you consider that not money but contribution or
In kind.
Oh, in kind. Yeah, cool.
Okay,
Any crowdfunding?
Crowdfunding.
Crowdfunding.
Hands up. Okay. Don't be shy.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And also there are like the funds, like there are not from government.
That's government. Funds are government.
Not like the bank funds.
That's private.
That's private. Okay.
That's private.
Yeah, some of the banks here do some give out some funding for audiovisual projects.
A typical structure. If you are an academic student, is that you are getting money from school. That's not much. That's really like 10% of what you need or less. You are eligible to ask money from audiovisual fund, which is government.
Right.
You have something like 4 options, like your city, then some banks, basically private entities. If the city is okay, municipal money is still government, but usually you are able to get some money from private or semi-private institutions. And then most of the people are either working somewhere, so they got some co-production, or they have some participating from studios, from equipment owners, from rentals. Okay, that's significant. Did I forget something to mention? Magda, what else? What else has the money? And then of course you have yourself until you are not totally burned out and out of money and in debt. That's basically the mix here.
Yeah, well, we've all been there.
Okay.
Well, at least I have. So what I've done, just give me a second. I'm just grabbing a finance plan template so I can show you guys kind of how I tend to approach the problem and what all the different elements of it tend to be. Where is it? Share screen, application, just Excel spreadsheet. How exciting. Love these. Okay, so
I love your style.
Okay.
I love your style. Okay.
right. Well, we're not. Yeah. We've got to dig right into
how
it,
did
right?
you do that green numbers? Okay, good. We know that very well.
Is that visible? Can you guys read it, or is it too small?
Not really.
Are you able to zoom on are you using PC or Mac? Can you zoom on something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that zoomed in enough?
That works.
Yep, that's good now.
working.
Okay, cool. So what we're looking at here, and there's going to be some latency, so I apologize with that for the scrolling and stuff, is kind of your basic finance stack. And you'll hear that term come around a lot. Now, finance stack is exactly what it sounds like. Where is all the money coming from, and when is it coming? And that's kind of what you combine together in order to figure out how you're going to fund your project. The first step in doing any of that is figuring out how much your project is actually going to cost. Who's budgeted a project before? Hands up. Cool. Who wants to be a producer? Hands up.
Okay, whatever.
Right, there is a Venn diagram there that should be overlapping 100%.
Yeah.
Right, if you're gonna produce something, you need to know how to budget it at least a little bit. Otherwise, you need to have enough money to pay somebody who can budget it for you. So, yeah, so there's your solutions for producing in a nutshell. Either be rich or learn how to do it yourself.
This is for one of your projects, right?
Yeah, so this is for a project, a feature film project, an Australian feature film, but generally this finance stack is pretty much the same from country to country. Depends on, the only thing that changes is the amounts that you get from each source, which necessitates a different approach to the whole problem in terms of who you're trying to get money from first. So, actually, no, we can talk about this in terms of Australia because I don't know how to finance a film in Slovakia. I do know how to finance a film here, though. So there are going to be some similarities and some key differences. I'll just go through what it looks like for Australia, and then hopefully with Marianne's expertise in your country, we'll be able to figure out where the happy medium is.
Okay.
So a finance stack is pretty simple. We're looking at where are all the different sources of income. An SVOD, we're all familiar with what an SVOD is, something like Netflix. Is Netflix in Slovakia?
It is also in Czech Republic.
Perfect.
And we are using it. We already successfully made a few things with the help of Netflix in our countries, and we absolutely love Netflix for that. So yeah.
Actually, I have a separate question. Does Slovakia have a content quota forced upon Netflix?
Content quota?
Is there a certain amount of Slovakian content that Netflix is forced to buy by the government each year?
I don't think so. No.
Because there is in Australia, right?
And,
No, there's not yet.
There's not
but
yet,
we're pushing for it.
For what reason would we do that? For what purpose? Because we are happy to watch Netflix. We are not like in position of telling Netflix that okay, you are allowed to come. We are in position like we are so happy we can watch some movies in Slovakia as well, because the content is usually very restricted. So when they open up, okay, they have different content for each country, as you know, as everybody knows.
How many people are in Slovakia? Excuse my ignorance.
People, 5-6 million people.
Yeah, I would say that you guys got a pretty solid argument for getting Netflix to have a content quota. Like 5% of all content in Slovakian Netflix should be Slovakian. But that's a separate political issue for another day.
Yeah. But it's an interesting point as well for Australian broadcast television. You know, we can buy American shows and British shows, but there has to be a certain amount of local Australian produced content. We can't just fill it full of American crap.
Okay, we got this kind of regulation for other media. Obviously, for TV license or for TV license, you need that, even for private TV license, definitely, and it's working that way. I'm not aware if that works also for Netflix or other streaming companies. So go on and
France and Germany, I think, have brought it in. So I think that's the way that kind of the world is going. So just be aware that at some point in the future, SVODs are going to have a country-specific budget that they probably going to have to spend. Anyway,
so you should be asking Netflix for money in the future, if not already.
Absolutely.
There is a voice that maybe Czech Republic, which is former Czechoslovakia, they have something like that with HBO, so we can.
All right.
But it's just a rumor.
Interesting.
Okay? We don't know it.
Okay, so anyway, there's really like only a few different types of finance. There's equity finance, there's market finance / debt finance, and then there's government rebates, which is also a different type of debt finance, depending on the rebate that you're looking for. Does everyone understand what the rebate is? I don't know if you guys have one in Slovakia, but it's basically money, it's a tax incentive. So if you make the thing, and then you finish the thing, the government gives you, 20 cents on the dollar or something like that back at the end of the process.
Well, we have this, but I believe it's not very often used. It's just like theoretical concept, and when you ask someone, they will say, yes, we have this in Slovakia. I'm not sure if it was really applied or used. We've got in past some American productions doing, I believe, Dragonheart in Slovakia, but at that time the regulation was not going on. But at that time the currency was so good that it was basically very cheap here. Right now we are not the cheapest country, and we know the mechanism. I'm not sure that we produce enough movies to make it really work for someone, and but we understand.
Well, it's one of those things that we use it in Australia on a case-by-case basis, and it makes up a huge proportion of the budgets for films that are Australian. So I would suggest to everybody, in particular, like go and dig into and find out what your tax rebates are for this type of stuff, and then take that information to a bank and ask them if they will give you a loan against that rebate.
Okay.
Because you can finance a pretty hefty chunk of each project by doing that, assuming that you follow all the rules and all the rest of it. Normally, if you're going to do that, the bank is going to want some sort of security over the thing, which means you need to get a completion guarantor. Somebody who's going to guarantee that your project is finished, even if you and the director and all your lead actors die in a plane crash, somebody will finish your film and give it to everybody who needs it. So, there's a siren. How exciting.
How is it with storm? Actually, the storm. We have sirens, and the storm is over, right? Okay. Good. We're good. It's over. Someone died.
Okay, so what I'm going to do actually is close this finance plan because I don't know if it's actually going to be that useful.
What is
what I'm trying to wrap my head around is to make sure that I'm giving you guys information that's useful in Slovakia, and not just information that's useful generally. Or perhaps we should focus this more on how do you get your project ready to take to market, like if you were going to Berlinale or Cannes or American Film Market, AFM, or to MIPCOM if you've got a television project, something like that. How do you get your project ready to package up and take to one of those places? What do you need to know before you go there? Would that be useful?
Well, definitely, it's more stuff for people who are really looking into professional career, like finishing the school. This is more like concept for people who are sort of innocent, so they are specially selected like lower grades to see your fresh view. I can tell you that we understand the structure of tax rebate, or I can explain it, but it's not that exciting because that's basically a politics. You need a political influence. And for that power, no one in this room has, I believe, well, we have zero political influence, everyone who sits here. We understand there is a possibility, and we understand that countries like Australia, they support art. They don't think that art is just wasting government's money. They support art.
Depends on the political party.
Okay, don't break our dreams, okay? But definitely I know that they are actively doing it and co-financing, supporting things. And it's also happening here. It's slowly, but it's happening from top down, unfortunately. It's not happening from bottom up.
What about your neighboring countries?
Our neighboring countries, like the nearest or most similar is Czech Republic, and they are well developed. They are comparable to Australia, even in the gross volume of movies, maybe a little bigger, I'm not sure. There's like
so what's stopping anybody in this room from going to the Czech Republic to make a movie?
It's the most common thing. Usually when we do a movie and it's like we need more finances, we usually have co-production, so we have some actors from Czech Republic, for example, or someone from Czech Republic. Usually when you're financing a movie in Europe, you cannot do it without a co-production.
Yeah.
Most common answer is
cool.
co-production, and most biggest difficulty is making it work. Because if you co-produce something, it's that double energy. If you do in one country, it's basically, you can imagine, it's a lot of energy.
Yeah.
If you start co-producing, the experience is double and more, because everything. So that's where we are, what everyone understands. But I believe it's this topic is maybe too high for that discussion. We don't.
Okay.
It will be better if there are like real producers who did already movies sitting here, and what we're really looking into is more like, what is your personal experience? Okay, you are creator, you are director, right? You are producer at the same time. And I very often I get, for instance, advice like, don't produce your own movie. If you want to create something, don't be a producer. Leave it for us. Leave it to producers. Do your job, okay? Direct and don't care. That's one side. The other thing is like, do you want to be interesting? Sell yourself. Be as good director and of course producer as well. So everyone wants your work, and then you will just get your money. That's the other thing, you know. So what would you say? What would you recommend?
I would disagree with those positions.
Okay.
Not meaning to countermand anything, but it's some of the advice that I give a lot of the younger screenwriters, directors, producers, actors here, is that increasingly I see that the industry writ large, the general industry, creative industries, is becoming a lot more cross-pollinated. These disciplines are all collapsing together, and it's much more common to see actor/creators doing their own YouTube channels who are making their own work on a tighter timescale with smaller budgets and pumping out a lot more content into the world, building their profiles that way. It is a slow, long, arduous path that is more similar to building a regular small business than it is to the big project approach that we were just talking about. Okay. But that being said, it is very much a direction that I see the industry moving in, and I can imagine that in 5 to 10 years, things like cinema, big cinemas where you, like, you know, films where you go to the movies to watch them, that's going to be like high art, not necessarily the art of them. You know, it's not necessarily going to be the thing that you watch all the time. It'll be the extension, theoretically, of me sitting at home watching Netflix, Martin Scorsese's $180 million Netflix-only movie that never got a cinematic release. Me watching that while also on my phone, while also checking the news, while also listening to a podcast, do you know what I mean? Like, it's this big, messy thing. Yep. So cinema is moving in the direction of high art, and content production is kind of moving into the common ken. And it then becomes a question of what sort of stories do you want to tell, to who do you want to tell them, and what's appropriate for that type of medium. And then how do you take that experience and turn it into a theatrical or feature film or television series producing career, or directing career, writing career, whatever it is.
Okay.
Tricky problem to solve, really, and most of it is kind of theory craft. If you think about it, is that there's very few cases where you can actually see somebody take that audience that they built online and turn it into a market-driven project. When I say market-driven, I mean a television network has paid them money to go and make a thing, and they've sold the copyright in exchange for that money, effectively. Or licensed it in perpetuity, something like that. So in a world where everybody has got a YouTube channel and everybody has an Instagram and everybody is pumping out all sorts of content all of the bloody time to every other human being on earth, how do you get recognized and how do you find yourself an audience? That's the real question that you kind of got to wrap your head around, and then really think hard about what the path looks like from what you're making now, this, whether it's 5-minute things or 2-minute things, and what does the path look like to get from that point to what you're trying to make at the end of the day. And in order to maybe demonstrate what sort of a thought process that could be, I'm going to talk about a transmedia project that's been kicking around in the back of my head for quite some time, and it's been difficult to get off the ground, but we're getting there. A transmedia project is basically something that has a different type of, a different piece of the story is told through different mediums, like X-Men, right?
Okay.
X-Men has comics, it has video games, it has feature films, it has television series that go along with it. And all of these different mediums all combine together to kind of create the X-Men cinematic, the X-Men universe, or X-Men transmedia universe. And so I was like, hey, I want to make something like that. So I had a feature script that I'd written, and then I started to think about, well, what does this feature script look like if I turn it into a novel? What does it look like if I turn it into a podcast? What does it look like if I turn it into a video game? What does it look like if I turn it into a television series? And then built out the world to kind of encompass those elements as well. And then went about the process of trying to pick the lowest hanging fruit, so to speak, on that tree of content. Because the idea is to build an audience, build a fan base for the particular intellectual property that you can then activate and turn into a new project or demonstrate to people who have shit tons of money on why that project has merit. Because that's really the question that you're faced with at that other end of the scale in the marketplace end is why your project and why not this book series that has 200,000 copies sold?
Okay, so
why are you, you know, why are you more special?
it's clear we are talking not about artistic projects when you want to go to film festival with your inner idea. Okay, that's like legit, but that's not for the broad audience. You are guaranteed your audience is the festival audience, and you will probably win some prize, and that's your career. But what you're talking about is something I would call like real, like live audience, like children, for instance. You don't have children on film festival, right? They are at home, they are everywhere just looking at iPods, iPads. That's your transmedia, basically maybe VR later, but not today. And we are talking about you have something you want to, you think the children can be interested in, and you want to, how to lift up this project, how to start it. Is that correct? I'm just trying to talk with my words, what we are talking about.
Okay, so this particular project is, I think that'll be easier if I talk about what the actual project is.
Okay, perfect.
It's set in the outback of Australia. This is the feature film. It's set in the outback of Australia, desert, red ground, blue sky, you know, that type of landscape. It's about a cop. He's super angry at life. He's lost his wife and kids. He goes out into the desert to investigate illegal weapons that are being smuggled. Turns out that they are being smuggled through Australia by a gang of demonic bikers. So,
motorbike riders.
Bikers, okay, yeah.
Okay. Right? Who, you know, they can't be killed. They're Pirates of the Caribbean type of thing. Anyway, that's that thing. But that's the end goal, the feature film project. Because as you well know, in order to get a feature film project financed, I'm going to need to find a director. I'm going to need to find some famous actors. I'm going to need to get some awards on the script. I'm going to need to find all of those different sources of finance. It is a long, difficult road. So how do I prove that this thing is valuable before I've made it? Because effectively, every single feature film project is a startup company. That's really how you should think about it. So you've got to think about what's the minimum viable product to demonstrate this narrative as a product. What about a comic book series? Okay, well, how much does it cost to get a comic book series? What do I need to do that? I can't draw. Forget that idea. What about a podcast? Okay, I wrote the thing, maybe I'll write a podcast of it and we'll do a narrated version of it. Okay, cool, we could do that. Then we're starting to get an audience for the project. That in itself is its own marketing problem, where you need to, who's the audience for a podcast, spoken word narrative version of this particular story? Where is that audience live around the world? How do I advertise in order to grab them? All of that type of stuff is something. How do I find that audience, the people who are going to enjoy it? Okay, could be a podcast. What if it was a book? What sort of people would like to read that book? Where do they live? How do I get the book published? How do I find them? All of that type of stuff. And pick the thing that's the easiest to do. And then go about making that thing. Now, here's the funny thing that kind of occurred to me while I was doing this thought experiment, is that increasingly nowadays, people are very much considering process as much a part of the final product as the final product itself. Does that make sense?
That means that you don't know how to do it, but you are starting doing it, and it will somehow happen because you are doing it. So the end,
not quite,
of the end.
Yeah, not quite what I mean. I mean more that. So I jumped onto Twitch. Who knows what Twitch is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Twitch. Are we all familiar with Twitch?
Yeah. Okay.
Everyone knows Twitch? Great, cool. Twitch or Mixer or whatever it is, YouTube Live. I jumped onto there and I went looking around to see who was drawing and doing, literally, I'm just going to draw. That's my job for the day. I'm going to draw some pictures, the camera's on it, and that's what I'm broadcasting to the world. I'm interacting with an audience while I do it. Mm-hmm. I'm working and talking to people. And through doing that, they end up building audiences. There's actually something like 6,000 Twitch channels that are just dedicated to creative writing only. Literally, my face, and on this side of the screen here is the page, the Word document, and I'm typing away and talking to people while I'm doing it. They are being a part of the story where, it's got audience interaction. It's a performance in and of itself. And that is a viable way to build a community or an audience around a particular project. Mm-hmm. And particularly for starting out practitioners, creative practitioners, who maybe want to prove out a big concept, something that's some Lord of the Rings scale thing. Somebody in this room maybe wants to make StarCraft the movie trilogy, whatever it is, some massive project. So how do you get to that end goal when you're a 20-something-year-old film student? You're going to start all the way down the beginning. And that's kind of where this marketing idea came from, was that if you start with something you can do it on your own and build an audience and build a fan base by doing that and deliver a product at the end of it, then the process by which you created the thing actually becomes part of the product. Mm-hmm. It's like you're doing a featurette on the writing of the book of the Lord of the Rings as you're writing the book of the Lord of the Rings. And then you finish the book and then that goes and gets sales. And then you can use that and the audience that you gathered and the metrics that you would have from going through that process in order to take that to a marketplace and say to Netflix, hey, all it was a camera on my, my ugly face and this here screen capture of a frigging Word document, and that was enough to get 6,000 people to pay attention. What's it going to look like if we've got, all the bells and whistles? You can start to build a case for the product that way.
Very inspiring, actually. I'm really inspired by this. If I imagine that, because I do animation movie right now, and if I imagine myself, and I always fantasize when I'm doing it, I also communicate with my audience in my mind, but I never realized I can make it happen with today's media, and basically make it part of the process, and that's a great thing. What do you think?
Yeah.
It's really something different than they teach you at the academy, obviously, because at the academy you're getting the big book experience, right? Like, yeah. But that's something really, really interesting. And please go
Well,
on.
I mean, yeah, it really came from that kind of like, what's the actual problem that I'm trying to solve here? And the problem, the real problem, is that there's, you know, like 400 million people on the planet trying to get creative works up at any one time, or some stupid number like that. Like, how does my voice, my creative voice, get above the insane amount of noise that's in the background? How do we get recognized? So yeah, that's basically the idea. Now I'm going to pull up, since you found that interesting, I'm going to pull up a document that lays out what that might look like.
Is the audience
as
plan?
Yeah. It's not quite the audience plan. It's another spreadsheet. I'm sorry.
Okay. I like spreadsheets. It's calming down.
It's how I think in spreadsheets. I plan scripts with spreadsheets. Which is probably not the best way to do it, but you know, whatever.
Whatever
it's a
works.
Thing. Okay, I think this is it. Yes, it is. Okay, so let me just share the screen again. No, not that button. This button. Share screen. This one. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the producer Bible and everything for No Rest for the Wicked. And what I've basically done, you probably can't see it, but down the bottom left it says production timeline. This is the content timeline, and these are the social media estimates.
Okay.
Right? So, and this, it took me about a half a day to a day to kind of just think out what this might look like. So basically I planned the project, and this project is like a 12-minute or 10-minute short animation done using motion capture and virtual production pipelines based on that feature script. And then, well, yeah, that's basically what it is. So I've just broken it out. You've seen this is, you know, you've seen this type of chart before. It's a Gantt chart.
Yeah.
Right, and it's just got the phases down the left, how long it takes, weeks spread out like that. Now, through all of this, there's also opportunities for content in each of these things, because everybody who's interested in character art may end up swinging by a Twitch, Mixer, or YouTube live channel that is broadcasting, talking about this character art, which is a way for me to find an audience member. So, if there was a character artist doing a thing, why not broadcast for 2 hours a day or an hour a day the actual process and talk through and give updates in real time and build a community that way? Why not use that process to build a Discord community or a TeamSpeak community or a Facebook group or something like that, a group of people, a Twitter group even, you know, a Twitter page that collates this audience and puts them in one place where they can get updates on what's going on with this particular project. And that way, 20 weeks down the line or 23 weeks down the line, when we actually deliver this 10-minute animation, we've actually got a bunch of content that's already out there in the world that describes what we're doing. Which brings us to the content timeline. So I basically plotted out each week what's an interesting thing that we could give to the audience, show to the audience, or show just into the scream into the void of the internet, hoping that somebody's listening. And I'll get to how to bring people to a channel, etc. in a minute. And don't get me wrong, this would be a lot of work to actually implement this, but it proves you've got an audience for your project. So I would have I'll just zoom in on this. Week 1, we're doing narrative development. Cool. On Thursday afternoon, we're going to do a 2-hour thing where we're literally just sitting here working, me and a scene partner, like a writing partner or something like that. We're figuring out the story, and anybody that drops by, we're going to talk to them. We're going to talk to them and see what they think and explain the story to them, and then keep working and explain the story and just go back and forth, just like any of those Twitch shows that you might see. And then on Fridays, we'll do like a little special. We'll do a project overview on the first Friday. And again, each of these kind of needs to have marketing that goes into it. So you can use online services such as Zapier and Buffer to collate all of your social media updates and posts and that type of stuff. So basically all it requires you to do is set up a Google Calendar and stick a bunch of images onto Imager, and you can automate all of that process. So it'll pick a random image and pick a random set of words that says, hey, we're going live in 10 minutes. Come and find us here. And it spits it out on Twitter and ats a whole bunch of people who might, or groups who might be interested in it, and start, going out into the world and finding all of those different groups who would be interested in them, pulling them all to your channel. If they happen to show up, great, you might snag one or two and move on like that. In my experience, because I wanted to prove this, I ended up doing it for, I was playing games for a while, and we did like a machinima type thing. And we ended up getting to Twitch affiliate status, which is like 50 followers and an average of, I think it's 5 viewers per hour. It took about 3 months to get to that point. And that was not going at it as hard as I should have. That was kind of, bored type of stuff. So yeah, with actually spending the time to market it properly, I think it would get a whole lot of more people. Anyway, so we mapped out all of the different things that we could show. The concept and look development thing, where we'd show the concept art and all the processes there. On the Friday, we would do an Ask Us Anything stream where we just basically answer questions the whole time. And most probably we would have a list of about 50 questions that we just made up that we want to talk about. And we would pretend like there's an audience that's bigger than it actually is. Do an overview of the actual narrative itself. And again, it's worth remembering that each of these things that you would send out into the world would be permanently stored on YouTube in your YouTube channel. So there's a pile of content that is starting to get out there already. And this will become important later on when I start talking about the Netflix conversation. So then we talk about character art. So there'll be character art development, and so on and so forth. And each of these different things, every Thursday and Friday, there's a 2-hour thing each day that breaks down some part of the process and shows it in real time, building audience interaction, building a fan base for the actual intellectual property itself, the narrative property, and then funneling them all into a single location, whether that's a Discord server or a Twitter page or a Facebook group or something like that, somewhere where you can communicate with them whenever you need to. And then, keep working through it. You can see that the amount of content that we put out increases over time until we get to this last part, which is the editing bit. And here is where we start doing cleaning up things, there's sound effects and that type of stuff, environment art, etc., etc. And then we drop a trailer at the end of it. The trailer to a 10-minute thing. That's all we're talking about. Through that, I went and had a look around to see how many people are out there in the world who are interested in these different topics on Twitch, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. And it turned out that on an average, at any time, Twitch has about 172 people looking at anything to do with game design. And since we were going to use Unreal Engine 4 as a development platform, theoretically 172 potential people who might swing by the channel and become interested in the story of No Rest for the Wicked. The story both of the creation and the story itself. CGI artwork is sitting around those numbers. Let me zoom in a bit here because you're probably too far away. Those are some of the numbers that we're looking at for the groups there. So Facebook, that block there, that's the block for Twitter, that's the block for YouTube. Those are live numbers. People are actually sitting around watching somebody else in real time. So at the end of the day, it was like, okay, well, let's collate all of these, run some averages, and just see what we're looking at in terms of the total audience. That's the audience summary there, which is basically 300 active people who might swing by, and that is simply a flat average across low, medium, and high. How many people we expect at the process at the end of the whole thing, and how many potential people are out there who are just interested in this. If we happen to get $5 grand, $2 grand, something like that for some targeted Facebook or Twitter ads. And then at the end of this whole process, the goal was to actually take that community and say, now we want to fund the feature film version of it, and we need your help. Let's run a Kickstarter. And so this whole thing becomes a marketing exercise for a Kickstarter or a crowdfunding campaign.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And that's kind of what I was kind of thinking about in terms of, let's repeat that process of, build a community. I mean, we have to make the damn thing anyway. Build a community while we're doing it, and then use the community to try and generate either interest or money for the project in order to get it to that next point. And then you can take all of this data with you to your meetings that you will inevitably get because you've got a shit hot piece of content with 10,000 views on it, to a marketplace or to a festival or to wherever you are. And that's going to add a lot more weight to your project than it just being good on its merits. Because that's pretty much the thing that any distributor is asking themselves whenever you bring a project to them is, who is this for and how are they going to find it? And by doing it this way, you've answered those two questions for them without them really, you can prove that you've answered those questions for them. So there's a theory of the case there.
Okay. So in practice, I may say that in the past, you remember our live 3D project. We got one project, big band together. It was a live puppet, 3D puppet, and it was speaking with the actor voice in real time. It was interactive, etc. And I
like a virtual production.
Virtual production, but it was 10 years ago. And I made like around distribute and our broadcasters. I was in TVO, TV Markiza, Slovak television. I was in 5 advertising agencies. I was everywhere. And one point of failure was, it was awesome product, I guess, because that was great product. But they didn't believe me because I didn't bring that audience. I didn't bring that weight. And I finally realized that it's much better to spend all that energy instead of looking towards TV bosses. And I met everyone, basically, every boss of TV, like people who they gave me like 1 hour time and they don't give you 1 minute. But I was like, I failed, because if I spend the time to get 100 people actively like a fan base and holding fingers for us and helping us and even watching us on YouTube or doing anything like that, that will be much bigger weight on my table and much stronger position, because they felt that all what I'm bringing here is just idea. That's like, they felt like it's all too virtual, okay? You want to do something, but why should I be interested? I own this TV, I got like millions of viewers, and you have 0. So what are we talking about? Okay. That was the general outcome of all those things, and I finally canceled the project. That was basically a mistake. And but my idea was like, okay, next time I really don't talk to powerful people. I talk only to audience, because that's real power. That's real like negotiation power.
That's the money. Yeah,
that's the money.
That's what the distributor basically looks at, is that if your audience is big, then they're going to make money. So that's where your value add is the audience.
So
and honestly, that's kind of our job, is to go and find it, like to tell a story to an audience. And so I think there's a real danger, particularly nowadays, is for, people frame this problem in terms of how do I pitch this to Netflix? Well, if you can go into Netflix with the best pitch in the world, or Amazon or whoever it is, and say like, oh, it's this great idea, and here's a concept art, and here's a story, and they read the script, and it's brilliant, and Tom Cruise really wants to be in this movie, like whatever. You go in there with all of that, That's one thing. If you go in there with that exact same thing and 10,000 people who are interested in it, you're going to get a sale.
You will be king in that meeting. You will be king, and they will be like trying to buy you, not massively.
Yeah,
that's true.
Because basically proven to them that with nothing but a box of scraps in a cave, you've managed to pull together a couple of thousand people.
Mm-hmm.
What are they going to be able to do with a couple of $1 million in their own reach?
So it's kind of snowball effect. If you bring small snowball, they have the leverage to make it like huge ball. But if you bring nothing and ask them to start a snowball, they will say no.
Yeah, you've demonstrated in entrepreneurship and startup kind of terminology, you've demonstrated a minimum viable product.
Yeah.
So how is it in practice? That's like a great input, right? Also inspiration. And where are you with your project at the moment? Is it like, are you already...
So this one here, I took this plan and Ben and I are kind of working on this on the side at the moment. Because basically this plan goes together with another plan that talks about how a virtual production company would be unique in Australia, etc. But I am putting this plan in practice with the first screenplay that I ever wrote, which is this steampunk 1980s alternate reality set in London type thing. And the budget is way too high. I'm never going to be able to, no one's going to give me the money to do that. No chance whatsoever. Okay. So how do I get that made? I'm writing a book. So through the process of writing a book, I'm streaming that out to the world and building a community by doing that. At the moment, there's about 162, I think, 60, I could check, but it's 100 and something people who are following along at the moment
as we
on Twitch.
Speak. Can we be part of your community and join your
yeah, of course. Okay. I mean, and it's interesting because a lot of people are, this is something else that I would like to let you guys really wrap your head around. Do not be protective of your copyright.
Okay.
Regard, because it's a real danger. I see it all the time, particularly with young people who have been told stories about how I showed this script to somebody and then they went off and made Ghostbusters and I could have been a millionaire. No, it's bullshit. What's really going on there is just people being afraid. Yeah. Honestly, if you're writing something and it is being broadcast and recorded on the internet with timestamps and somebody rips it off, it is the easiest thing in the world for you to prove it and the most difficult thing in the world for them to get errors and omissions insurance. So basically, everybody out there in the world would rip off your creative property. They may be inspired by it. More likely, you're going to get dragged into it, into something.
That's basically a revolution in thinking of creative property, because since prior the online media and all those timestamps and etc., that was the most or biggest concern to protect something, because it's very usual that also with TV and broadcasters, each year they write out competition and people are bringing ideas, and next year you see your show but with someone else credit, right? And that's like constant for everyone. So that's like really good point. Start doing it online with timestamps, okay? Because no one can fake, like, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, there's a video of you with your words on the screen, and if somebody shows up to watch it, you know who they are half of the time.
And you have
chances are pretty high. You know what I mean? Like, it's not difficult to pull those threads together. Not only that, when you're talking to distributors or talking to market entities, or you do get that Netflix meeting, and they ask for your script or they ask for a pilot, just send it to them. I mean, the email is timestamped. They're not going to steal it.
Okay. No printouts, okay? Just send it.
And I mean, that's if they ask for it, right? And just to kind of make sure that everyone's clear on that, don't send people's scripts unsolicited. That's actually really annoying for producers, because I might have, for example, I've already got a project that's about demonic bikies in the outback. if I get a project that is about a cop killing vampires in the outback, that might be too similar to mine, and then I could be accused of copyright infringement. So before somebody sends me a screenplay, they'll normally send me a synopsis, just a paragraph thing. Really get your synopses like really, really, really good, razor sharp. And and that way when people ask for your stuff, it's like, oh, cool. They've read the little thing, they know that it's interesting, they know it's not going to conflict too much with anything else they've got, then they can have a look at it. And they'll ask for it. Yeah, and then send it. Don't be shy. Don't send them a non-disclosure agreement first, right? Because that'll just piss them off. Or you have to wait for them to sign something and send it back to you. And they're busy people and they're not going to bother, and it'll end up withering on the vine before you even get a deal.
Awesome.
Don't be shy.
Okay, so the energy in the room, how is it? Are we alive, everybody? Again, I think it's time for questions now, because you are first graders, like the producers. You are thinking about what I'm doing here on this school, okay? Everyone is doing YouTube videos, VR content, and we are studying, what is it, like script or a book from 965 about production. So here is like one producer alive at the other side of the planet, and just shoot your questions. Go on. Now. It's happening.
I'll send the questions on Twitch and join the stream.
Yeah, right. Jump in the Discord. Actually, did I hear that people in the room are doing music videos, VR music videos?
Come again, sir?
Anyone doing music videos?
Did I hear that? Somebody's doing a VR music video, a 360 music video?
Well, I've done some, okay, but
right, yeah.
Actually,
that's it.
Samuel here, tell us about your VR project a little bit, just a few words. It's not probably music video, but you are doing in Unreal. We are
doing
bachelor thesis.
just bachelor thesis, a small film. That's like basically all done in Unreal Engine. It's just like, and we are aiming to like use the VR as a part of the film to like be able to experience the film inside the VR. That's the whole thing.
So VR spin-off of a film, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And we are trying to like. Use the Unreal Engine to like maybe find the camera angles and all that stuff, like the VR scouting inside the environment that we created. So that's
great. Okay, look, my advice straight off the bat is start trying to build a community for that, right? Because that's not hard to do, and you can do that for nothing. It doesn't cost you anything to do that, right? So go and mess around with that. And the other thing that I would suggest is if you're going to do something in VR, and this is something that's only occurred to me since Byron Bay Ben, is that the one thing that VR does, the one thing that medium can do that no other medium can do, is embody the participant or the player in an avatar of some description. Nothing else can do that. So really have a good, long, hard think about how you're using that particular device to support the narrative that you're telling or support the theme of the thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it's really, really, really important, because otherwise you end up with that question of why bother in VR?
Yeah.
You know, it could just be a music video then.
Yeah.
So, right? So if it's going to be VR and you're going to be inside somebody else's skin, why that person? How does the way that you use that skin support the meaning of the thing? Yeah.
So Ellie here, she's working on animation movie, also her bachelor thesis, I guess. What's the name of the?
Yeah, it's about a little lamb who wants to be a dragon.
A lamp?
Cool.
Who wants to be a dragon? It's awesome. I love that. It's like, it's just.
Yeah, but it's like a kid's story. Like for kids. It's not a film for adults. It's like
Right.
It's for
Kids
children audience, right? But
yeah, perfect.
I believe you also was playing in your shows with a little bit different media than traditional movie, like doing it in 3D or maybe also VR spin-off version of that.
Yeah, I was looking for a medium to do it, but I end up with the stop motion.
Stop motion. Okay.
Yeah, but
Oh, cool.
but yeah, it's still like a question how to. I was also thinking about the mixing it, like to use just stop motion puppets, and but the locations like do it in the other medium and maybe mix it.
Okay,
I don't know.
just quickly for producers, stop motion is like Wallace and Gromit stuff, so you're moving things. I think that's like awesome, interesting.
It is the coolest.
Yeah, the coolest. And what I guess, it has like huge potential for that like media, social media spin-off. That means if you are doing stop motion project, I would definitely love to watch your project going on, like log in everywhere and see like, wow, we have new friends, because it's so real, it's so tangible. You know, that's the problem of CG projects. It's like, or always like virtual, sometimes ugly, because 3D development is always ugly unless you are a really good drawer. But with puppets and camera, it's so warm and real, because you start modeling and I would like to touch it. You know that feeling. I always want to reach into the movie which is stop motion and help them like
and see what it feels like.
Yeah. So
one of the coolest things I saw an experiment maybe 4 years ago was somebody, build a stop motion puppet, and they would animate it, but for the first pose, they would take a photo, turn it maybe 20 degrees, take another photo, get it from every angle first, and then do the next pose. Then they put it inside Unreal Engine and put it on a card, so every time you walk around, you'd see the different angles.
Yeah.
But then it was this living puppet, full VR version of that.
wow,
That's right.
what's a good idea
Pretty
actually.
smart, but I can imagine it's like possible for a short movement, but do you think it's really possible to make it like in a full short movie? Because I think
I would be interested if I am your investor and I have some money, okay? But if you make 10 seconds, I definitely want to see it, and maybe a little bit more than read all your script and listen you for 1 hour, because that's what's like, you know what I mean? That's like the toy, that's the energy. Like, okay, wow, show me that. Okay, show me, because it's maybe that's it, but that's the thing, which is your pitch, because on the pitch there will be like 20 competitors with a lot of pages and presentations, and you will come with VR helmet. Like, who's interested?
And the thing that's kind of
Or
cool
an AR model.
Yeah, AR
Or
could work
AR,
really well as
yeah.
well. It's actually
So
with augmented reality, you
for a
could
stop
just
motion
have
thing
your
that actually grows out of the desk right in front of them.
because your character then you animate it. You don't have to create any environments. It can just be on this table, on this floor, view through the phone.
Yeah.
But
Like Pokemon Go, except with your characters.
and
Seriously, and you could put it in the room with them. I mean, imagine how cool that would be in the pitch. Is that you get to tell them the story, and you say, well, here's my character, and just like Ben was saying before, take a photo of it, 1 degree increments, or take a video of it and just spin the camera around on a big long dolly. Grab that in a circular dolly. Grab all of that footage, throw it all into UE4 or something like that, make up the billboards. It's got some really interesting proxy model generation stuff at the moment that, I can see him nodding. There's ways to make that model out of that type of stuff. You could scan it with a Kinect if you wanted to, and make a 3D model out of it that way. And then you could use the AR model in your pitch.
Yeah, definitely.
Story is the thing though for that one, I would say. Kid story, like children's media, lives and dies on the story. The story will be enough to basically make a picture book come to life. Then all of the rest of it is cream.
Vladimir, what's your project for
Marian.
bachelor? Pardon, Marian, sorry. You are the
Marian.
Okay, Marian, what's your? Are you doing something like real footage with visual effects, or are you doing something like full CG?
Well, currently I'm working on a music video actually.
Okay.
Not in VR. It's just actual footage, actual actress, and just effects, lights, colors.
How are you doing so far? Are you waiting for footage, or are you participating in pre-production?
I am editing the footage now.
So it's already shot, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
And we have
Awesome.
we are working on animatic, and we are expecting to maybe combine the footage, the edited footage, with the animatic, like early January or so, and then work on VFX.
Okay. So it will be a combination of CG and live action?
Yeah. We have
in what manner or method? It will be like picture in picture, or it will be custom?
No, one big CG sequence of cars flying through a city, like imagine Blade Runner city.
Okay.
Yeah.
So something like that, and arriving to actual footage of a bar or a club, and combining it.
Well, and it's supposed to be like real. That means the visual effects will be like, I feel that's real action.
Yeah. Well,
so it's not
at
still
best.
like okay.
At best, yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
But yesterday I got the inspiration from Ben to create something in VR, so maybe I'm thinking about doing some other project later this year.
Can you tell just a little bit about it, or
it's just a dream, not really an idea.
We are making dreams. That this is factory of
sure.
dreams are made.
I was thinking about some post-apocalyptic kind of stuff, but nothing specific yet.
I like your dream so far. And how is it VR?
Well,
is it social? Am I
no, just maybe do it like a game. Well, it would be a film, but create it like a game, like Ben was telling us yesterday, to create it on set, like live, basically. That's what caught my idea.
So, Ben, for clarity, is that like a virtual production pipeline you were describing to them?
And like we sort of spoke a bit about sort of Haven as well, like sort of living in a story, story world, being an active member in a story.
Okay.
Embodied VR,
Yeah.
Well, if I am your audience, I would like also see the process. That means that's what Dominic says, that start with the process. So make the making of that part of the whole story. That's like, I think, very good.
And start playing with Unreal or Unity now, and really digging into kind of how to drive those systems. It requires a little bit of doing. You have to learn.
Right.
Okay.
To learn
actually installed it today.
But once you have it, you do anything.
For this kind of projects, we usually create teams. That means there will be a specialist, maybe or a guy who is already related with Unreal. But it will also include your hands-on experience. Okay. Now question, any one of you, because they are creators, and of course we have producers, does any one of you think about terms of getting a producer help? Do you have a producer for that? Yeah.
Not yet, but sure.
So you are looking for one?
Yeah.
Ellie, how about you?
I was thinking about maybe asking for a co-production.
Asking?
Co-production?
Yeah, because there is lots of great stop motion studios.
Okay, do you have producer for your? No, not yet. Okay.
But I was maybe thinking to write them, maybe Mauer film, or what's it called?
Marvel film, yeah.
Mauer film.
Mauer film, alright.
Czech. They were also co-producing the other.
Okay, so you are already looking for some professional production, which will basically help you to make your thesis movie. They might be interested. That's maybe the good approach. How about
so that guy who did that film, Kotska?
Michael Strauss? Yeah. Probably. Okay. Good. Sam, how about you? Did you even think about asking producer or your fellow student producer?
Just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Do you guys talk about kind of how to navigate? Because what it sounds like what you're effectively talking about is finding a producer to option your work or to eventually acquire the rights to your work so that they can produce the project and go on with it like that, right?
It's more like okay, we are able to get financing from the school and from the funds, but it's required you got a student producer, and that is like notorious problem that the departments, they look into each own other path and they don't meet basically. So sort of we are.
What happens to the copyright through that process?
Sorry. What happens with copyright?
What happens to the copyright through that process?
If you are a student of the school, the copyright is schools, and you basically don't worry about it. You are protected. So if you work on if you do something at school and you are creator, the school is copyright holder and also your protector. Your movie will go to festivals. It will be not monetized, okay? It's not monetized movie, but it will go.
But the school will basically manage, look after your interest.
And also your producer will actively seek that movie because that's basically credit for everyone. So what you end up with is a movie and a credit, like prizes from festivals, etc. That's basically what I'm looking after. You are not looking after monetization of that. That comes maybe later, okay, but that's not the game here. But what you need is, you are not raising money that much as you are raising some energy, because you are easily get exhausted, and when you are exhausted, it's usually too late to ask for help. When I am exhausted, I have no energy because I have no energy to pitch, and I feel like, okay, people just see someone very tired and maybe upset, so they don't really want to get involved. So what I'm trying to help create is, especially with the producers who are starting, is the degree is to sort of fusion of departments like animation, visual effects, and the production, of course. And maybe later also direction, DOPs, etc. To not consider anything CG, animation, VR, like something like, okay, this is not our world, or this is something like post-production stuff, we don't care about it, we are filmmakers, right? And they will just finish it, or fix all problems in post-production. Everyone hates that. I believe that you producers hate when you don't know what's going on in those studios, when you come in meeting and say, okay, you don't have enough money and time, you should come like 1 year ago to make a reservation with 1 million, but you have 0 and 0. Go, get out, I am too busy, right? The other thing is that if you really try to do anything, like what we just heard now, you really are alone with your computer, which is absorbing enough. We know how difficult it is to work with graphics. It's like, it's consuming 90% of my energy sometimes, even to start my eyes start working. And if I'm really open, if I have my flow and do my work, the last thing when I finish is start thinking, how do I do the rest, right? I did my job, but no one knows about it, no one helps me. And as I see it, I'm facing like 10 times more work ahead, and I'm already 90% exhausted. How is it going to happen? So that's why we end, at the end of the year, out of, I don't know, 40 creators, like 30 projects are unfinished. And there is no way to finish them, like we don't see the horizon when to finish it. There are people who did project 4 years and ended up without final content. That means you cannot use it in no way, because there is no credits at the end and it's unfinished. You even cannot screen it to your, I don't know, average, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so, and
totally.
What I realized is this lack of synergy, and basically also part of this moment or this mix of people here is basically start of something what I would call like a fusion of that energy and sort of chemistry with what we need.
Yeah, well, it's a collaborative experience. Anything in the creative industries is,
with
the exception of novel writing.
Novel writing, that's like introspective. How is it on your university? You studied before. Is it a little bit different? People are like actively working from bottom up or from top down? They are forced to do that. Please tell us.
I'm very skeptical of the university courses in Australia, mostly because I feel like that they're not necessarily, they're very good at teaching skills, but they're not necessarily very good at teaching like the creative problem solving and future planning and entrepreneurship that's necessary to succeed.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like it really takes quite a broad sort of look at things, I find, to get anything up, to get any projects up on their feet. It really requires divergent thinking. And so the universities in Australia, they tend to make good writers, good directors, pretty good producers, but really there's not enough business in the producing course, not enough entrepreneurship, not enough startup mentality, design thinking, that type of stuff. And then honestly, there's not enough of that stuff in the directing or the screenwriting or the acting courses. Because really, like I was saying before, that's the way the industry is going. These fields are collapsing altogether, and the era of the specialist, I mean, like, you know, you're still going to be really good at what you do primarily, but you've also got to do these other things, you know, or at least know what those other things are. Like in my first year of university, a directing tutor told me that a good director is the jack of all trades, but the master of none.
Okay.
Well, do you know what I mean? And I kind of took that to heart because that really resonated with how I find the craft of directing is really about. I don't need to know how to apply makeup, but I need to know how to talk that language. Same with I need to know how to talk to my gaffer or my grip or I need to know what a 6K HMI is. I need to know those things. I don't need to know how they work. I don't need to know the burn time on the bulbs, but I need to know what that light does and how it does it, at least in the basic sense. That's the same for every department. So yeah. So and then you take that to producing, it's the same thing, but just bigger again. So yeah. Anyway.
We also feel that the academy is more like a place to teach tradition, okay? So, because if you are interested in tradition, like stop motion or traditional filmmaking, where else to find that information? So there is assumption that when you sign up for like National Film Academy, not like private training school, you are interested in making like serious art, and you are interested also into this tradition, and they are ready to give it to you. The other thing is that you can end up pretty much like isolated from real life with that approach. Because sometimes you just do art without audience, right? So you do art for yourself or art for art. And art for
art's sake,
Yeah, okay. Good.
Well, there's nothing wrong with art for art's sake. But it is, at least in my mind, if I came across somebody who was a brilliant stop motion artist, for example, like a true auteur, that would be the way that you would go about marketing them. You know, in my mind, I would be like, no, this is not entertainment for the masses. This is art, capital A, art. You know, and there's an audience for that somewhere.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just about finding that. I mean, that's really what the job of a producer is. Here's a great story or a great idea or a great thing or whatever it is. Who is it for? How do we bring them together? That's it in a nutshell. How you do it is where all the craft of it is.
Perfect. I have messaged the producer must leave because they have exam, and we don't want them got thrown out.
Oh yeah, we've gone over time. Yeah, sorry guys.
It's almost midnight, so you're about to turn into a pumpkin.
Yeah, probably.
I apologize for that.
No. As you may have gathered, I can talk for hours about this stuff and not draw breath.
And we love each minute of that. What I would suggest at that moment, I'm sure there is more questions and more ideas, and many of them will come later. So that's usually like, I should have asked this. I also ask in the interview Magda to make sure that we have everyone's contact who is sitting in the room, who saw that, who was part of that, and we will try to make something online. I'm not a pro in this. I'm old school. I'm dinosaur, but I will do. I will try some, I don't know, Discord or something. I will fire up definitely something, and I would love also to start like small fan base. Like probably you will be the fan number one of those 3 projects we discussed here, and I am definitely fan of yours. So that much I can do with my skills here, internet and social media, and I guess let's try this follow up because that's basically the outcome, and I think it's a great outcome.
Cool.
So
I'm always available. Ben, feel free to share my contact details with everybody. That's totally fine with me. Phone, email, etc. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm happy to answer anybody's questions at any time. And become fans.
That's what it is. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. I believe we are already near finishing this. So. Dominic, again, thank you very much for that, and well, we wish you a lot of balance on that, balance on that wheel with that chainsaw. Watch out for the chainsaw.
Right.
And, but don't throw it away. It's this is the danger element important, and we will cross fingers for your story. How you manage to cycle through your own project path, and we will try also to continue blending energies and doing something interesting, and probably involve also the scene from your country with our country. I'm not sure if it will work, but we will see.
Yeah, if there is any market opportunity that you think I might be able to help with, feel free to reach out. Upon graduating earlier, I'm not sure, it's really about how that copyright works, on how that might actually shake out. But happy to offer help, advice, contacts if you need them, whatever, just let me know.
Thank you very much. And I'm looking at that screen because it's big and you are big here, but actually your eyes are, I guess they're, sorry for that. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, and good night to Australia.
All right, good night. See you guys. Good luck in your
evening.